Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to another stream. It's your host, Dhaiphong, and I just want to wish you all the best wherever you are, however you are tuning in. I really appreciate all of you for coming. Thanks so much ahead of time to all the moderators who are in the chat helping out. It is such a necessary service, and you all do great work. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Appreciate you coming out and spending Saturday with me. We have a packed show today. It's going to be a great show. And I have a lot of announcements to get to as well, which has changed up my schedule a bit. I'm not usually on Saturday nights, but this is a special time. It is a very eventful time in the world, and we have to cover these developments with true rigor and with a commitment to the truth. And so that's what I try to do here. And this channel is truly yours. So before we get started, of course, you know what to do. Please hit the like button. It boosts the stream in the algorithm. That is very helpful. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you have not yet. Hit that notifications bell, which increases your chances, although it doesn't guarantee you'll be notified when I go live or post a video. And of course, this channel is still making tech upgrades for a trip to Vietnam actually in October that I am going to be taking. So the trip itself actually is quite costly, but I am also trying to do better vlogging work out there when I am there for 2.5 weeks. And of course, there is volunteer labor that happens with this channel that I'm trying to compensate more. So please do consider subscribing at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong to support the channel. Every dollar goes back into the labor that it takes to produce a regular channel. And I have a lot of announcements I'm going to get to before I get to the content, and I'll describe what we have on deck today. But first, this channel has hit 80,000 subscribers, actually now over 81,000, but this channel has hit 80,000 subscribers. Thanks so much to everyone who has subscribed to this channel. It is truly an accomplishment I did not think I would ever get to. The growth of this channel has been enormous and astounding, and I am truly humbled by all of your support. Also on deck is this coming Thursday, I will be presenting to the UN Security Council on the dangers of the ongoing militarization and arming of Ukraine by the United States and its NATO allies. I will be doing that presentation at the UN Security Council Thursday, 3 p.m., and hopefully we'll get that video out as well on the channel. I am extremely honored and, of course, a little bit nervous to be doing this, but I think it is truly necessary, and I look forward to that opportunity. Also, this coming Tuesday, save the date. It's going to be a late night stream, but it's going to be a little different. I'm collaborating with a Chinese independent media company called Radii. It is actually run in part by a friend named Brian Wong, who used to be a pretty high up assistant at Alibaba to Jack Ma. Now he is doing youth-oriented media, and we're going to have a conversation. Carl Zha will be on the program. Dana Burton, who is a Detroit native Black American who lives in Shanghai. We will be talking about Chinatowns and China then and now, and it's all going to be surrounding the end of, I think, season 3 of Warrior, which is an HBO show that depicts Chinatown in San Francisco during the 1870s. And so we are going to have a great conversation. It's going to be a wonderful collaboration. I got to meet Brian and Dana in Shanghai during my trip, and we're going to have a lot of fun with Carl and others talking about this subject. And I will be giving a presentation on the geopolitical significance of this question of Chinatowns then and now. So save the date, 10 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. So that is August 14th. And so that is the initial announcements. Okay. Before we get to the content, I want to first just say, again, thanks to everyone for all of your support. And now what we have on deck today is a whole host of commentary and analysis on really important geopolitical events. first on deck, we are going to talk about Ukraine's stalled offensive. We're going to talk about what the collective West itself, the neocon foreign policy establishment, is saying, and how it really does point to the fact that the Ukrainian offensive is essentially defeated. And this is being admitted more and more. And I'm going to go through a bit of a timeline with the help of friend of the show, Brian Berletic. He actually will join the stream live in about a week, Sunday the 20th. But today he is going to help with helping us understand how the Western media, the mainstream media, the neocon foreign policy establishment is talking about the Ukrainian offensive. And then I have also articles from this timeline leading up to the offensive and into this third month of the offensive that shows that these warnings about how bad things were going to get were always there, but they were, of course, covered up with the hubris and with the lies and with the distortions that the collective West has relied upon to forward a narrative that allows it to continue pummeling and pushing this proxy war permanently. So we're going to get into that. And then, of course, we're going to get a lot into China. And so China recently has been in the headlines because the Biden administration has made another gaffe on China directly after a policy move. And I will be getting into the economic war on China that has been escalated by the Biden administration and, of course, Biden's comments. And then I will get into how this relates to this question of Taiwan and the escalations there. China is sending pretty dire warnings to stop and cease these escalations, and the U.S. just isn't listening. The neocons, of course, are just not listening. So that's what we have on deck for content today. Okay. We have 1,100 people already in the stream. Keep liking as you come in. We have 388 likes. Let's boost that. That helps boost the algorithm. And also make sure you're hitting the subscribe button, the notifications bell, and of course, supporting if you are able. So let's get started. And if we have some time, because I did start in good time today, better than usual, hopefully if you have super chat questions, you can ask them. Oh, and I can do some engagement with the chat as I usually and normally do at the end, and do some thank yous to all of the supporters. Tell me how I sound, and I just want to make sure that the video is okay. Please let me know if there are any issues that you are noticing, either sound or video, before I get started with the content, because I'd like to get that out of the way before I do. All right. So, people say I sound good. Great. I hope so. And people say the video is perfect, no lag. Great. That is good. I see many people saying good. All right. So let's get started, everyone. Let us get started. I love the chat. I love watching the chat because you all are very, people say I have a little too much gain on my audio. That is probably true. But what I can do, I don't want to turn the gain off too low. I'll just lower my mic. Wow, my mic volume was actually really high. Wow. Okay. So I'm lowering my mic volume. Okay. So it should be a little better now. All right. Let's get down to business tonight. Okay. The collective West, or better yet, the neocon foreign policy establishment, is admitting that the Ukrainian offensive is essentially defeated. And this should have been well understood. This should have been something to be expected if rational minds and if people in the West and people around the world were properly informed. Ukraine didn't go into this offensive with advantages. It had already burned through multiple armies, and there had been warnings up into or coming up into the counteroffensive that showed that perhaps this was not going to go as planned. And of course, during the NATO summit, there was a lot of consternation among NATO members about not how to continue to support Ukraine. That was never off of the table. But it was quite clear that the goings on, the drama, the fact that Zelensky was talking out of the side of his mouth, being left alone, lambasting, and he's continuing to do this, lambasting his overseers and his masters in the collective West, that all of this should have pointed to the fact that Ukraine is not in a good position at the moment. But this runs contrary to everything we have heard in the Western mainstream media up until this point. And now you have Joe Biden about to send 24 billion US dollars to Ukraine for security assistance, economic aid, humanitarian assistance, etc., essentially to continue to prop up a government that was always a puppet of the United States, always a puppet of NATO, and is being used to do NATO's dirty work. So the collective West and its media, its mainstream Western media, its corporate-owned media, is now admitting that the Ukrainian offensive is defeated. And Brian Berletic had a great video to show us exactly how the Western mainstream media is doing this. And I'm going to play what he had to say first, and then I'm going to get into articles that I have pulled up to show kind of a timeline of how this has transpired. Because it isn't just now that this has been going on. The warning signs have been there since the very beginning. That's a very unflattering picture. Let me get to Brian. But it isn't just now. There has been warnings from the very beginning as the Ukrainian offensive was being said to be ready to launch. It was delayed. It was delayed. It was delayed. And the warnings were coming. So I'm going to show you a timeline of that. And before that, let's get into what Brian had to say.
And we are now in the third month of fighting amid this Ukrainian offensive. And I want to take a look at the live map. This is liveuamap.com. This is a pro-Ukrainian live map. So keep that in mind when we look at it, and we can see that the line of contact has barely changed. There's been hardly any changes in the line of contact. We see these red rifle icons. This means that Russian forces are on the advance. And we see areas here, Robotino. This was supposedly taken by Ukraine, according to this map. That has not been confirmed. As a matter of fact, it has been confirmed that that did not happen. And they are even indicating rifle icons, red rifle icons, indicating Russian forces are in these areas, not Ukrainian forces. If we zoom out, we can see that there are these long-range attacks in Crimea. We've heard about the drone attacks on shipping through the Black Sea, also on Russian naval vessels, and we see a steady stream of news stories about these drone attacks in and around Moscow.
So that's been happening. I haven't had much time to cover that because every time they're happening, I am not going live. But indeed, as what I believe in active desperation, Ukraine has been launching over and over and over again these attempted drone attacks on Russian territory. Of course, the naval fleet, the oil fleet that was sailing through the Black Sea, that was targeted, and of course on Moscow and other areas of Russia, most of them being intercepted or downed before any damage is done. And of course, Crimea has been targeted over and over and over again. But this has escalated the more that Ukraine's counteroffensive has stalled. And that's what has happened. It has stalled. There has not been any movement. And as you saw from the UA map, that is exactly what the map is showing.
And this is because the offensive has stopped. It is ground to a halt. Ukrainian forces are not making the progress they expected to. They need to demonstrate to the world that somehow they have the initiative, and they are doing so by carrying out these attacks. But in terms of strategically hindering Russia's military operations in Ukraine, these attacks do nothing to accomplish that. They are purely for political value. The offensive is in such a bad state right now that even the Western media is beginning to admit something is wrong. Let's look at this article here from Vox. What went wrong in Ukraine's counteroffensive and what's changed now? And that kind of suggests the possibility that things are better, but if you actually read through the article, it is extremely bleak. The article says Ukraine had tried to tamp down expectations about the counteroffensive long before it had begun. Their own expectations that it would be wildly successful. They ended up having to tamp that down before it began. But Kiev's past successes and Moscow's past failures, the deliveries of new advanced Western weapons, and a fresh crop of Western-trained Ukrainian recruits had all had a lot of folks very hyped, maybe overly so, about what Kiev could achieve. But that would only have worked if you took that at face value and you didn't think about any of these things they were talking about, these so-called successes by Ukraine. I'm going to get into that. And again, they're referring to Kharkov and Kherson last year.
Yes, and I'm not going to get into that in his video. So those are the successes last year, last summer, the summer offensive that Ukraine waged, that supposedly they took all this territory and it was so impressive. But what they did was they burned through an entire army in order to hold a small amount of territory. Russia retreated based on its own principles of waging a war of attrition. And then Ukraine was a sitting duck. And that's why Ukraine has not only been able to make any gains, but has actually had to cede more from Russia because Russia has the advantage militarily now. But let's continue.
The supposed mistakes that Russia made. And they're talking about the withdrawal from, say, Kiev, or the withdrawal from Snake Island. All of these instances that have been misinterpreted by Western analysts, by the Western media, by Western military and political leaders, all of these misinterpretations helped fuel the misconception that this Ukrainian offensive was going to be much more successful than it actually has turned out to be. The article continues. It says, Western equipment can withstand a lot, but vast minefields are vast minefields, and Kiev and its newly trained forces have largely failed at conducting combined arms operations on a large scale. That is, coordinating troops and all this different weaponry like armored vehicles and artillery to blitz through Russian lines. Kiev has also suffered high casualties in its attempts to do so. Ukraine knows this and has now shifted strategies to a much more attritional approach, trying to degrade Russian forces and logistics as it focuses its operations on 3 axes of attack.
So now Ukraine is waging a war of attrition, according to the Western mainstream media. This is how desperate things are becoming. This is not the strategy that Ukraine has been pursuing throughout. What has Ukraine said? What has the US and NATO said? This is a war, an all-out war to take back territory, to expel the so-called Russian invader, and to do that as quickly as possible. A war of attrition means you are fighting, you are grinding, and you are doing so with the expectation that defeat will come to your enemy when they are worn down, when they have been slowed down, and when they can no longer fight. That is not how Ukraine has supposedly been fighting this war. It's been fighting this war as a total all-out effort to eradicate a so-called occupier. Of course, we know the circumstances are different. They are not that. That is not the overall circumstances that Ukraine found itself in. It's always been a proxy of the United States since the coup in 2014. It's always been a military outpost. It's the porcupine that's meant to prickle Russia. And it was all about waging an ongoing and escalating war against Russia on behalf of NATO. But the fact is that now the Western mainstream media has to try to spin this as some kind of war of attrition for Ukraine, and nothing could be further from the truth.
And now here's a New York Times article, very, very similar in nature. It's not a sprint, Ukraine's Marines insist. It's a marathon. Journalists from the Times spent 2 weeks with troops from brigades trained and supplied by NATO to get their take on how and where the counteroffensive is going. The article says they all have a strong sense of urgency. We have to do this fast, one said, but they also warned that the fight would be long and hard. A lot of people thought it would be very fast, and in the autumn, we thought we would be in Crimea. But every meter of the tree line is very difficult. It's not a sprint, it is a marathon. However, to believe all of this, to believe that Ukraine can shift from trying to storm Russian defenses to an attritional approach, or to think that they can turn this into a marathon rather than achieve everything in a sprint. This is as flawed as thinking the offensive was going to be successful in the first place. There was a very specific reason why Ukraine and their NATO sponsors chose to storm Russian positions rather than conduct this as an attritional marathon. There's a very specific reason. We all know what that reason is. They lack the trained manpower, the armor, the artillery, and the ammunition to draw this out in a long attritional way. This is how Russia prefers to fight. This is how Russia prepared for this conflict.
So that's all I need to play from the video, because there is a lot more to it than this. But this sets the stage. Brian set the stage for how the Western mainstream media is now talking about the conflict. And you see the New York Times there going back and forth. It's a marathon. No, it's a sprint. We need to go as fast as possible. But actually, things are going to be really difficult for Ukraine, and the results are playing out. It is really difficult for Ukraine. There is no sprint. There is going to be no total victory in a matter of months. There isn't going to be the taking back of any territory. They haven't even penetrated the front lines, as the UA map had shown. But I want to now show you one of the more recent admissions, and this comes from CNN, and it was published not too long ago on August 8th, okay? And it says that Western allies receive increasingly sobering, and they put it in quotes. So you got to love the Western mainstream media for always being willing to spin things in a direction that is not the truth. But they received sobering updates on Ukraine's counteroffensive. This is the most difficult time of the war. So, weeks into Ukraine's highly anticipated counteroffensive, Western officials describe increasingly sobering assessments about Ukrainian forces' ability to retake significant territory. This is from 4 senior U.S. and Western officials briefed on the latest intelligence to CNN. And let me just change the formatting a bit as we go along to make it bigger for all of you. So, they're still going to see for the next couple of weeks if there's a chance of making some progress. But for them to really make progress would be to change the balance of this conflict. And I think that's extremely and highly unlikely. A senior Western diplomat, of course they're unnamed, told CNN. An Illinois Democrat, Mike Quigley, said, "Our briefings are sobering. We're reminded of the challenges they face. This is the most difficult time of the war." So that's a different narrative than what we were being told when the counteroffensive was building up. We were told that Ukraine is prepared, Ukraine is ready. There were all sorts of debates about whether Ukraine should go after Crimea. All of this feels like a pipe dream as of right now. The primary challenge for Ukraine, the article continues, is the continued difficulty of breaking through Russia's multi-layered defense lines in the eastern and southern parts of the country, which are marked by tens of thousands of mines and vast networks of trenches. Ukrainian forces have incurred staggering losses there, leading Ukrainian commanders to hold back some units to regroup and reduce casualties. Russians have a number of defensive lines, said a senior diplomat, that haven't really gone through the first line. Even if they would keep on fighting for the next several weeks, if they haven't been able to make more breakthroughs throughout the last 7 or 8 weeks, what is the likelihood that they will suddenly, with more depleted forces, make them now? Conditions are so hard. A senior U.S. official said the U.S. recognizes the difficulties Ukrainian forces are facing, though retains hope for renewed progress. We all recognize this is going harder and slower than anyone would like, including the Ukrainians, but we still believe there's time and space for them to make progress. So John Kirby, the White House National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, addressed the speed of Ukraine's counteroffensive on that Tuesday, telling Wolf Blitzer of CNN's Situation Room that, quote, "Even the Ukrainians, including President Zelensky, have said they're not going as far or fast as they would like," end quote. While they're making progress, they are And they are. It's incremental and it's slow and it's not without its difficulties, but they keep trying and they're still at it. There's active fighting along that front. They are definitely trying to push forward. How far they'll get, what that will be, what kind of breakthrough they might be able to achieve, I don't think anybody can say right now. We've got to make sure we're staying behind them and supporting them. So this is the admission. This is not going well. They're trying to, you see John Kirby trying to play this communications chief. He's trying to play public relations. He's trying to massage our minds into thinking that actually progress could be made. But as Brian showed from the live view A map, there is no progress being made. So they're even trying to lie their way into a kind of narrative spin so that we will believe the opposite of the truth. Surprise, surprise. This is Neocon Foreign Policy 101. Western officials also say the slow progress has exposed the difficulty of transforming Ukrainian forces into combined mechanized fighting units, sometimes with as few as 8 weeks of training on Western-supplied tanks or other new weapon systems. The lack of progress on the ground is one reason Ukrainian forces have been striking more often inside Russian territory to try and show Russian vulnerability, said a U.S. senior military official. So there you have it, an admission that these attacks on Russia are desperate. These are desperate attacks. They're trying to show vulnerability to public opinion. They're trying to make it seem like they still have a dog in this fight, when in fact they have been tamed. They have been brought to heel, to use the absolutely ridiculously awful and disgusting rhetoric, and spin it on its head, turn it on its head of Hillary Clinton. Our soldiers are doing their best. The enemy is conducting active assault actions in a number of directions, but is not succeeding, said Valery Zaluzhny, who told that to Mark Milley, according to a readout issued by the Ukrainian government. Talking about the situation in the south, where Ukrainian forces have struggled to gain ground, Zaluzhny said heavy fighting continues. Ukrainian troops step by step continue to create conditions for advancing. The initiative is on our side. So again, there's a lot of denial here too. This is not going to be, and we should never expect people who are so indebted to a neocon war, to a permanent war on behalf of the U.S. hegemon, that people like Valery Zaluzhny would just go out and admit that everything is terrible and we're defeated. No, but you can see the spin here. Things are difficult, but we're trying hard. We're pushing forward. We're doing our best. And we're making necessary sacrifices, on and on and on. Some officials fear, though, that the widening gap between expectations and results will spark a blame game among Ukrainian officials and their Western supporters, which may create divisions within an alliance which has remained intact for nearly 2 years into the war. The problem, of course, here is the prospect of the blame game, that the Ukrainians would then blame it on us. Last month, at the Aspen Security Forum, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pointed out that the slow arrival of advanced weapon systems from the West was the reason for Ukrainian forces' slow progress so far. Zelensky said that, quote, "We did plan to start the counteroffensive in the spring, but we didn't, because frankly, we have not enough munitions and armaments and not enough properly trained brigades. I mean, properly trained in these weapons." So there you have it. I mean, this is what has been going on. There has been an ongoing propaganda assault to try to convince us that Ukraine has a chance here and that it should keep pushing forward. But even Vladimir Zelensky, in his temper tantrums, in his attempt to complain and whine his way into even further armament, has told his overseers that it hasn't been enough. Zaluzhny, the entirety of Ukraine's defense ministry, they've all said it. They've all said that it just has not been enough. And there's a big reason for that. It's because Ukraine burns through what the collective West provides. And of course, the collective West, especially the United States, has been very careful. And I have covered it here. There have always been concerns. And you all may know that the United States is a hegemon. It is not there to just serve Ukraine. The United States has a war machine that is not just geared toward this one conflict. The proxy war on Russia in Ukraine is but one facet of a global militarist agenda, one that is incredibly expansive, trillions of dollars, 800 plus military bases, hundreds of thousands of troops scattered about the world. This is not just about Ukraine. So the US is very concerned that if it gives everything to Ukraine, it won't have anything left to fight China or to, I don't know, now there's all this drama in Niger with Niger threatening to kick out France and even the United States. So how can the United States fight other wars if it's giving everything to Ukraine? Well, this has been a concern for quite some time. And this issue of ammunition, of weaponry to Ukraine has been one that has been on the on the radar of the collective West, the neocon foreign policy establishment across the collective West for quite some time. So before the counteroffensive even started, and this is the timeline I want to go through, I want to show you how the collective West has been thinking about this and how they've been talking about it for several months. This is before. This was written in May 2023, a full month before the counteroffensive even started. And this was written toward the end of the spring. And of course, we all know that this was supposed to be the spring offensive, and it ended up being a summer offensive that now is looking like it has been defeated. So in this commentary, so this is a Bloomberg, James Stavridis, and James Stavridis is a former military official, I believe. Let me see. No, he's an opinion columnist, but he's a retired U.S. Navy admiral, a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, and of course, an academic for the global military machine. But what he had to say was that Ukraine is running out of ammo, and so is the United States. But look at the next headline, or the subheadline. The West is better at producing weapons, but also faces global supply chain problems. So this has been the back and forth from the foreign policy establishment. It has been, well, we're in trouble and we can't avoid talking about that. And in places like Bloomberg, or this is republished from Japan Times, in places like Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, they're written for investors, they're written for the elite. They can't hide everything from them, so they need to roll out little nuggets and kernels of truth. And here you'll see a struggle, kind of a cognitive dissonance of sorts, that shows how desperate the situation has been for several months, not just now, but there was concerns this was always going to be a problem for the offensive. So as the war in Ukraine rages, and with Kiev's forces likely to begin an offensive any day now, and of course it started a full month after this article was written, both sides are now facing shortages of ammunition, electronic components, precision-guided weapons, and even cement. And so this was during the both sides argument. Of course, now we know that Russia is not having any kind of weapons shortages. It has continued to pummel Ukrainian forces. It has continued to demilitarize Ukraine. It is not running out of missiles or any other kind of weaponry. It is fighting this war of attrition exactly how it wants. But while the West has a vastly larger overall capability to deliver, you hear the chest thumping here, the necessities of combat snarls in the global commercial supply chain are beginning to manifest. The real spring offensive may not be tanks and armor, but upscaled weapons productions in the factories of Ukraine's democratic supporters. What should they be doing collectively to make sure Ukrainians get what they need to turn back Russia's illegal and immoral invasion? What will be the impact on the broader global supply chain? So even now, the thesis of this argument is, or article, is that the West has to do more. It needs more weaponry because it's out of weaponry. This was just a fancy way of saying they don't have enough. So as a North Atlantic Treaty Organization's military commander over a decade ago, I would often look deep into logistics and supply chains as I contemplated our combat operations, aka wars, in Afghanistan, the Balkans, Libya, and counter piracy. We felt comfortable that the overall Western defense industrial base, which supports 1.2 trillion in collective military budgets for 31 NATO nations, could handle these conflicts with relative ease. So there you have an admission that these smaller countries, and with the combined arsenal of what NATO had in stock, that it wasn't hard to fight wars against Afghanistan and Libya because these countries didn't have militaries to fight back. And so what he says is that, but what made me nervous a decade ago was the possibility of great power conflict in Europe, despite the fact that they were always dripping and drooling from the mouth wanting it, but notably a potential flare-up with the Russian Federation. While the Democratic allies enjoy overwhelming capability and inventory advantage, Russia's total military budget is under 70 billion, 1/10 of NATO's at best. The Russians have a competent industrial base, lots of raw materials, and can draw on conscript labor to man the machines in the foundries and factories. So don't you just love the hubris of Mr. Savardis, this former Navy admiral and also NATO commander, who is thumping his chest about how much NATO is superior to Russia, then says, well, actually, I'm kind of nervous about what Russia has in stock and in store for us if we were to do something, or if we were to continue on this path with Ukraine. So while NATO is more than a year out of Afghanistan, the huge needs of Ukraine are driving challenges in supplying material to combat operations at a level I didn't anticipate. The need for electronic components in particular to build precision-guided weapons, sophisticated drones, anti-ship cruise missiles, and so-called smart artillery rounds is soaring. Despite the sluggish global economy, civilian firms are competing with Western militaries for the crucial semiconductor chips, particularly high-end ones produced largely in Taiwan. And here you see why also it is so important for the United States and for NATO to expand out to the Pacific and to target Taiwan as a proxy for war with China because of this semiconductor shortage in need. The United States is worried about losing its advantages. Western car manufacturers and heavy equipment producers, from Caterpillar to GM, General Motors, are feeling the pinch. Cement in high demand in the U.S. for the infrastructure projects just beginning to come online from the bipartisan infrastructure law is getting scarce as Ukrainian war needs rise for reconstruction. A number of analyses and war simulations are trying to project critical pain points. Guns, missiles, ammunitions, especially howitzer shells, are not of most concern. Notable among stockpiles running low are the 155 millimeter gun rounds that have emerged as a key offensive punch for the Ukrainians. Several analysts believe that Ukraine is burning through a year's worth of U.S. pre-war production monthly. So this has been a major problem for the United States, for NATO, is that Ukraine is firing shells. It is burning through its weaponry at a pace monthly of what the U.S. and NATO countries can supply and produce annually. So while the DoD, the Department of Defense, will continue to protect its own war reserves, the excess armament levels stockpiled for contingencies beyond basic needs of the U.S. war plans are very low. And it's not just howitzer rounds. The high-performance HIMARS rockets are in short supply as well, for example. The defense industrial base is stepping up production, taking a page out of the U.S. military-industrial complex, they should say, at the start of World War II. As Yale historian Paul Kennedy outlines in his brilliant books, Engineers of Victory, about the technology, organization, war production that turned the tide of the war, the Allies eventually outproduced the Axis. While we are far from total mobilization of the 1940s, both the big defense primes, and many smaller producers of high-tech systems are rapidly innovating and producing what Ukrainians will need in the months ahead. But as new orders have increased, another problem has emerged: a severe shortage of skilled munitions workers. So here again is this, oh, well, things are really bad, but there is some hope, except we don't have what we need to materialize that hope. So these are the warnings, okay? And I don't have to read the rest. There's only a couple more paragraphs. In a sense, what he is saying is Ukraine needs more. The United States needs to spend more on weaponry, on producing more weaponry, on increasing its stockpiles so that it doesn't have to dip into reserves. This is a familiar narrative that we've heard over and over and over again. So during this counteroffensive, right now you're having the neocons on CNN, right? They're talking about how things aren't going well. There's trouble ahead. There's trouble now. Ukraine has slowed down. It's stalled. There's no satisfaction on any side with how things are going. Now, the Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal wrote a very interesting editorial last month, which again indicated that this is not a new problem. So America is running out of ammo, says the Wall Street Journal. Biden admits that the problem, but why not do something about it? So here you have, again, the same issue. And this should all point to what now is being admitted by the neocon foreign policy establishment months later, a month later, months later, is that the problems were easily predictable, that this problem of ammunition, this problem of just getting another Ukrainian military armed was a huge issue, and it was not going to be resolved in this offensive. So President Biden is taking flack for sending cluster bombs to Ukraine over the weekend, where he blurted out the truth that both Kiev and the U.S. are running low on firepower. So why doesn't the commander-in-chief unveil a new national effort to expand U.S. weapons production and stocks? The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition, said Joe Biden on CNN. This is a war relating to munitions. They're running out of ammunition, and we're low on it. The U.S. is giving Kiev more than 2 million 155 millimeter rounds, and the Pentagon says Ukraine is burning through 3,000 shells a day. The U.S. is ramping up to produce more than 20,000 shells a month this year and more in 2024, said the U.S. Army. But America's adversaries can do the math and understand the U.S. may struggle to support a long war. The Biden crowd has cited limited stocks as a reason to withhold the Army tactical missile system, which could help Kiev strike deep into Russian positions. The administration is now leaking that it might furnish missiles as Ukraine's summer offensive becomes a slog. So there you have it. A month ago, they were admitting, the neocons were admitting that this is no longer an offensive. This isn't we are charging forward with a very precise amount of time that we want to get this done. We want to defeat the enemy. In fact, it is back to a slog, meaning it is Russia's war of attrition that is winning out. So Congress's supplemental cash for Ukraine is helping refill America's armory, but Biden has an obligation to make sure the U.S. never goes Winchester, as the saying has it. And not only for Ukraine, the lesson applies to the long-range missiles the U.S. may need if China decides to strike Taiwan. So as I said, they're concerned about whether they can wage war on China while they're doing this with Russia. So this is what is happening, right? There are huge pushes. I don't need to read the rest of this op-ed because that gets to the crux of the matter. The huge issue is that the U.S. is out of weapons. There's not enough training. There's not enough manpower. Ukraine is not going to be able to overcome these challenges because the U.S. and NATO countries can't move fast enough to supply Ukraine with another army as it's about to burn through another one. And what do I mean by that? Well, Ukraine was already short of ammo, short of manpower. They were drafting, I'm not kidding, they were drafting 16-year-olds, elderly. This has gotten really, really ugly. And the casualty numbers, this is from Telesur, the estimated number of casualties in Ukraine's counteroffensive written August 4th, so not too long ago. So the Russian Foreign Ministry reported that the Ukrainian military has lost 43,000 troops since launching its counteroffensive in June. 43,000 troops. And this includes not just the troops that have been killed or injured, and Russia is saying they have been killed, that this is 43,000 killed. So there are probably more casualties in terms of injured. But this has also included more than 4,900 pieces of Ukrainian army's diverse armament being destroyed, 26 aircraft, 9 helicopters, over 1,800 tanks and other armored fighting vehicles, 25 German-made Leopard tanks, 7 French AMX wheeled tanks, and 21 American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. So those are the consequences, and that is going to be the result from here on forward. There is nothing that the United States and NATO can do to turn the tide in this way. NATO does not want to dip in. These countries do not want to dip into their entire stockpile, lest they forget that the neocon foreign policy establishment is not just trying to wage a war on Russia through Ukraine. It is trying to militarily encircle Russia in totality. It wants its fellow NATO members to be able to launch a possible war on Russia should one come to be. It wants to continue to militarize the African continent, as we've seen with developments in Niger, in order to be able to control resources there and beat back the presence of Wagner and also the presence of China economically and Russia economically too. It wants to continue to militarize the Asia Pacific, which is project number one, so that it can continue to escalate with China, to build up toward a war there. So there are many priorities, right? These are the priorities of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, of NATO, and Ukraine is not going to be able to get everything it wants in order to achieve its objectives, nor would it likely be effective, because that would be seen as a major move of desperation, and Ukraine has already shown and proven that it is not capable of using these weapons in a manner that allows it to be as efficient as it could be. It's just not an efficient fighting force. This is why this war was always Russia's to win. And that is why the fantasies of the neocons, this neocon fantasy of a Russia defeat at the hands of Ukraine, has been crumbling ever since the beginning of the war. But now it has come to a head. Now the climax is here, and the collective West itself cannot help but admit the problem. And that problem is that Russia is going to win. So that's it for that story. And the next story gets me even more excited because, to be frank, Biden's gaffes are laughable. All right. They're laughable. They're funny to me, and I'm sure they're funny to a lot of you. So we're going to talk about his latest gaffe with China. But while we're at it, we have 2,500 in the stream. Thanks so much for joining me today. It is great to be with you on this Saturday. Please do hit that like button. We have about 1,100 likes. Let's try to get up closer to that 2,000 mark. Right before we get to the next topic, let's do a like storm. Thank you so much. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Hit that notifications bell. And I am trying to increase revenue so that I'm able to compensate volunteer labor, increase tech capabilities, as well as pay for an upcoming trip to Vietnam in order to report from there. I'm going on a delegation with Vets for Peace, and I'm going to do some, hopefully some really good work out there. So to support all of these efforts, patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong is the way to do it. And there are many more options in the link tree below in the video description, or you can go to the links on the under the channel banner now. They've changed the format, but you can find Patreon, Substack, and many other options there too. So let's get to the next story. All right. The next story is a doozy. So Joe Biden has blasted China. U.S. President Joe Biden has blasted China. This comes on the heels of many so-called diplomatic visits that I've called fake diplomacy, in which the U.S. has sent out climate envoy John Kerry, Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and on and on and on. They've gone to China over the last several months. It's been kind of a summer of meetings, and each and every one of them has produced very little results, very few results. And that was all by design. In my opinion, these visits were nothing but a show. And almost each and every time these visits occurred, there was an escalation in warmongering rhetoric and policy, in particular, the economic war on China. When I was in China, Janet Yellen came to visit about a day or two after I left Beijing in early July. And before she came, there was a travel warning to Americans saying, you might get arrested by China without any cause or purpose. And so you need to be warned not to travel there. When Antony Blinken came, Joe Biden, directly after the visit, this less than 24 hours, told a fundraiser with a bunch of oligarchs and told them that Xi Jinping was a dictator. And this caused a stir and consternation, and of course, rejection and repudiation on the part of China. Well, Joe Biden is at it again. And this is really something else. Okay. This is really something else. Joe Biden said that China is run by bad folks. The US president has also reportedly told political donors that the Chinese economy is a ticking time bomb. So before I get into this article, though, I want to, because it's going to review a lot what was said, here's what Bloomberg reported on this development in a very interesting way. Okay. Basically rejecting what Joe Biden had to say. And I think this shows a conflict among the neocons, of course, and the corporate elites, the oligarchy on China, because these comments were very just off base. They didn't make any sense. And there was a lot of misinformation within them. So it wasn't just ideology. It wasn't just calling Xi Jinping a dictator, but Mr. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, basically was pushing lies. And so I want to show you what Bloomberg had to say about this. Okay. Here is the report from Bloomberg.
Adding insult to injury, calling China a ticking time bomb, and adding, quote, "That's not good, because when bad folks have problems, they do bad things." Let's get to team coverage now with Bloomberg's Katie Lyons and Tom Orlik out of Washington. Katie, what did the president mean by that?
Well, he was essentially poking at China's economy, John, but in doing so, he also said a few things that are just simply factually inaccurate. He was talking about how they have a higher number of people of retirement age than working age. That statement not only is untrue, it's off by hundreds of millions of people. He also said China has gone from growing 8% a year to 2%. China grew 5.5% in the first half. So he was saying some things that were untrue, but definitely sharp criticism of China's economy at a time in which the economic conversation around China for Beijing is likely highly sensitive. I know Tom will run through.
So she just said what he said was untrue. the counterfactual, hey, China actually does not have this huge retirement age population. It's not suffering in that way. And the fact that the Chinese economy is a ticking time bomb, the growth numbers are completely wrong. He said that China's economy is only growing at about 2%. That is exactly the number that the United States is currently growing at, around 2%. I believe last quarter it was 2.2%. So this is just total projection, but it's not being I don't think it's being done purposefully, because you don't pull numbers out like that on purpose. You're not that would just be making a fool out of yourself, and that's what Biden is doing. But I don't think that was purposeful. The reality is that China is growing closer to 5% at the moment and has gone up as high as 8% in 2021. But let's continue.
More on what is going on in the economy and some of the fragilities of it, but it could be poking the bear a little bit here, especially at a time in which President Biden and his administration are trying to stabilize ties with Beijing. We have seen something like this happen before, John. If you recall back in June, also at a donor event, Biden referred to Chinese President Xi Jinping as a dictator in the almost immediate aftermath of Secretary of State Antony Blinken returning from a trip to Beijing, attempting to normalize relations. Of course, since then, we have seen other officials traveling to Beijing. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen made a trip, as did climate envoy John Kerry. We're expecting Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo to do the same, but this still could be disruptive in this relationship and could make it more difficult, perhaps, the proposition for President Biden to meet in person with Xi Jinping this fall, considering not only he is making remarks like a ticking time bomb, but also the U.S. is taking active action to restrict China's advancement of certain technologies.
So that's true. This is all true. And so that's a very truthful report. Indeed, not only is Joe Biden making these kind of remarks which soil and essentially destroy any kind of diplomatic efforts that I believe were always fake. And maybe there was a kernel of, what's the word, genuine sort of feelings about keeping U.S. investment in China and U.S. trade with China relatively stable. Maybe there was a kernel of genuine desire to keep that stable. But the fact is that all of the policy moves by the Biden administration are saying and doing the exact opposite. So that's what we're going to get into. But before we get into how at the same time that Biden is making these absolutely afactual, lie-riddled remarks about China, the Biden administration is escalating economic war on China. And all of it is in the lead up to a supposed fall visit that Joe Biden is supposed to make to China to meet with Xi Jinping directly. This is something that was promised all the way back during the G20 summit. And that promise to keep relations stable has not been kept by the United States. And so now Joe Biden said that, and it was worse than this, the ticking time bomb, China is run by bad folks. Okay. And I want to just read you what he said because I think she did an okay job, the Bloomberg reporter, but I think the summary helps give you even a better picture. So at this Park City, Utah fundraiser, so this was in front of oligarchs, Biden said that Xi Jinping's government was in trouble because economic problems were a ticking time bomb. They got some problems. That's not because we had, that's not good, because when bad folks have problems, they do bad things. So there's a latent kind of threat there. Oh, let me, it's a little too small. So that's not good because when bad folks have problems, they do bad things. And then he called the Belt and Road Initiative a debt in noose, alluding to China's loans on developing countries. So it was even worse than what the reporter said. So I just wanted to clarify that. But now I want to talk to you about this investment ban because it's the next step in this economic war on China led by the United States. And it is mirroring, it's beginning to mirror what the United States has been doing with Russia. But the fact is that unlike Russia, China is not just a competitor, but has actually surpassed the US in many fields technologically. The same can't be said about Russia, despite Russia's resiliency. So the White House unveils a ban on US investment in China's tech sector. And here's what the Financial Times has to say. Financial Times is actually one of my favorite outlets in the mainstream because it truly does speak to the ruling elite, and they are less likely to lie to the ruling elite in the same manner. So the Biden administration will ban some U.S. investment into China's quantum computing, advanced chips, and artificial intelligence sectors as it boosts efforts to stop the Chinese military from accessing American technology and capital. And now, mind you, this sabotage of diplomacy also goes into this area. Before this investment ban was officially signed off on, Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, she's supposed to go to China later in August. And this investment ban was coupled with, and I think supercharged by, accusations that China supposedly hacked into computer systems relating to the relevant departments, the Commerce Department, Treasury. Basically, this whole Mike Pompeo-esque China stealing our economic secrets is being repeated by the Biden administration. So the new executive order unveiled by Biden on Wednesday will come into force next year and will require companies to notify the government of other investments in 3 Chinese sectors. The actions will largely affect private equity and venture capital firms, as well as U.S. investors in joint ventures with Chinese groups. A senior official said it would create very targeted programs that would focus on 3 sectors that the administration has marked out in a series of technology-related measures aimed at China. We want to provide bright line guidance on what is prohibited and separately what is notified. Biden said technological progress in the sectors pose significant national security risks because computers could advance in ways that would help develop sophisticated weapons and break cryptographic codes used by spy agencies to protect data. The order is the latest series of actions designed to limit Chinese access to advanced technology in what U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called a small yard, high fence strategy. So Beijing has countered that these actions are designed to limit technological progress. China's Commerce Ministry on Thursday expressed serious concern about the order, saying it deviates from the principles of fair competition and the market economy that the U.S. supposedly advocates. So last October, there was a G20 summit where there was a promise that this meeting would lead to more stable economic relations and cooperation. And China has consistently asked the United States to stop efforts like this, but they continue to escalate nonetheless. Now, as the economic war escalates, okay, there have been many, many warnings coming from all sides. So there have been warnings from China. There have been warnings from the ruling elite. There have been warnings from the economic oligarchs who are worried about their investments, not just in China, but everywhere, because this will become a supply chain issue. They are worried that this could actually have negative ramifications. Remember, what has sanctions on Russia done? It has actually curtailed and slowed down the global economy. And while some corporations in the military industrial complex and US big oil has run away, there have been huge impacts with inflation, etc. And so we have warnings coming out. And so this isn't necessarily a popular development, okay? For the Financial Times again said US investors are preparing for uncertain future after tech ban. After Biden announced a ban on US investment some of China's key tech industries, the founder of a Shanghai-based semiconductor startup felt forced to react. After the news came out, I was determined to move the team out of China, at least part of the team. Otherwise, the financing will be very limited. The U.S. ban, announced an executive order and due to come into force next year, aims to block investment in quantum computing, advanced chips, and artificial intelligence in an effort to stop China's military from accessing American funding and know-how. For their part, U.S. investors are trying to work out the potential impact of Biden's order on their holdings in China and weighing up strategies to comply or exit. So there you have, that's what's happening. They're seeing the writing on the wall. But there have been already a lot of pulling out of China. A lot of these tech companies are doing that. Buyout groups struck deals in China worth $47 billion in 2021, but they fell rapidly to just $2.4 billion in 2022, $2.8 billion so far this year. So U.S. investors are cooling on China tech deals. So here you have it. Since the start of this economic war, look at the dip here. Look at in semiconductor deals, a huge dip. In AI and machine learning deals, look at that dip, okay, in the last year or so. So this is a problem right now. And there is a bit, that was less of a warning and just a bit of a reality check that there's going to be lost investments. But the warnings have come, okay? And I'm going to first show you The Economist. The Economist is lambasting what the Biden administration is doing with China. And this is not an old article. This is actually within the last few days. Joe Biden's China strategy is not working. And so if anybody knows The Economist, you know it is a voice of the elite. It's a voice of the neocon foreign policy establishment. So on August 9th, President Joe Biden unveiled his latest weapon in America's economic war with China. So new rules to police investments made abroad by the private sector and those into the most sensitive technologies in China will be banned. For decades, America cheered globalization of trade and capital, which brought vast benefits in terms of enhanced efficiency and lower costs for consumers. But in a dangerous world, efficiency alone is no longer enough. In America and across the West, China's rise is bringing other aims to the fore. Understandably, officials want to protect national security by limiting China's access to cutting-edge technology, which could enhance its military might, and to build alternative supply chains in areas where China maintains a vice-like grip. So there you have it. I mean, that's the admission that this is an economic war, that globalization, investing with China, cooperating with China is by far secondary to containing China and ensuring that China just can't learn from what the United States maybe has been able to accomplish. There's, of course, a truth that is being left out here, which is that China has actually advanced. And that's what they mean by vice-like grip on certain industries. It's that China has actually been kicking the U.S.'s can in a lot of these areas for several years now. So the result is a sprawl of tariffs, investment reviews, and export controls aimed at China, first under the previous president, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden. Janet Yellen, America's Treasury Secretary, traveled to Delhi and Hanoi, India and Vietnam, to tout the benefits of friendshoring, signaling to company bosses that shifting away from China would be wise. Although such de-risking measures would lower efficiency, the thinking goes, sticking to sensitive products would limit the damage, and the extra cost would be worth it because America would be safer. So it would be worth it. The Madeleine Albright, Iraqis dead, 500,000 dead. It's worth it. And for people in the United States, this is the interesting thing, is that oftentimes China gets blamed for the poor working conditions that have transpired in the United States, the declining living standards, and that globalization is a big part of that. That is true in part. But what actually is true is that employers decided to just send, of course, these corporations sent their production lines to their supply chains and their production lines to the global south for much lower labor costs and, of course, much better tax benefits. And they decided to reap super profits from that. And at the same time, while eliminating a lot of jobs, continue to pay Americans, very working class people in the US, very low in order to ensure that the competition between US workers and the global south was in fact a race to the bottom rather than an attempt to actually increase the standard of living in the United States. Globalization was never meant to do that, and it was not China's fault. It was that the US used its opportunity to cooperate with China at the working class in the US's expense. China had nothing to do with that. There was no reason for US corporations to do this if they had any other interest but super profits. But of course, they didn't. And China was just one country where US corporations eventually decided to invest. So the consequences of the thinking are becoming clear. Unfortunately, it is bringing neither resilience nor security. Supply chains have become more tangled and opaque as they have adapted to new rules. And if you look closely, it becomes clear that America's reliance on Chinese critical inputs remains. More worrying, the policy has had a perverse effect on pushing America's allies closer to China. This may come as a surprise because at first glance, the new policies look like a smashing success. Direct economic links between China and America are shriveling. In 2018, 2/3 of American imports from a group of low-cost Asian countries came from China. Last year, over half did. Instead, America has turned towards India, Mexico, and Southeast Asia. Investment flows are adjusting too. Chinese firms invested a staggering $48 billion in America 6 years on. The figure has shrunk to $3 billion. For the first time in a quarter century, China is no longer one of the top 3 investment destinations for most members of the American Chamber of Commerce in China. For the best part of 2 decades, China claimed the lion's share of new foreign investment projects in Asia. Last year, it received less than India and Vietnam. But you dig deeper and you find America's reliance on China remains intact. So this is a different argument. This is a warning that there needs to be more decoupling, right? And so that shouldn't come as a huge shock, right? It shouldn't come as a huge shock that the US, that the economists and that the neocons are pushing for more decoupling. Production, so America may be redirecting its demand from China to other countries, but production in those places now rely more on Chinese inputs than ever. As Southeast Asia's exports to America have risen, for instance, its imports of intermediate inputs from China have exploded. China's exports of car parts to Mexico, another country that has benefited from America de-risking, have doubled over the past 5 years. Research published by the IMF finds that even in advanced manufacturing sectors where America is keenest to shift away from China, the countries that have made most inroads into the American market are those with closest industrial links to China. Supply chains have become more complex and trade has become more expensive, but China's dominance is undiminished. What's going on? In the egregious cases, Chinese goods are simply repackaged and sent to third countries to America. At the end of 2022, America's Department of Commerce found that 4 major solar suppliers based in Southeast Asia were doing minor processing of otherwise Chinese products that they were in effect circumventing tariffs on Chinese goods. In other areas, such as rare earth metals, China continues to provide inputs that are hard to replace. So what this is really saying, and I don't need to go into the rest because all this is saying is more de-risking, more decoupling, is, and it's an untold secret, is that the more that the United States decides to decouple from China through economic war, China embraces the rest of the world. The rest of the world says, wow, this is a good deal to help us build up our manufacturing capacity, our production capacities, increase our ability to export goods and to get a real return on investment and to grow economically. And then those countries trade with the United States. So what The Economist is saying is, Joe Biden, this is not working. Your investment bans are not good enough. All right. So that should tell you the mindset of the neocon foreign policy establishment. They're making it out to be that somehow this is not consequential enough. And so this economic war, I mean, it's dangerous because as you've seen with what's happened with Russia and the destabilization of the world economy based on these sanctions as being a big part of this destabilization, the same is happening with China. These economic tariffs, the trade war, the sanctions on tech, all of it is actually having a negative impact. And so China has warned, and there are many different warnings coming from Chinese English language media. And I'm going to show you a couple to conclude the segment. So Chinese English language media is warning that Washington cannot afford a tech divorce from China. So this is what's so interesting, is that the US thinks that it can just restrict trade and tech cooperation, that somehow the global economy is just so fluid and so able to absorb those shocks. But the truth is the opposite. The truth is that every country has its own set of resources, its own market share, its own advantages, its own disadvantages, its own competitive advantages and not so competitive disadvantages. And that is what informs how countries cooperate together. You're not going to trade the same thing for the same thing, right? So what this is doing is it is destabilizing the so-called global supply chains, and that leads to many risks. And so China has told Joe Biden through its English language media that this restriction list is not popular with US tech and financial companies who are already voicing their concerns. So the decision, right? So of course you have this ban, and China is calling it protectionist. It's a protectionist move that could risk backsliding on hard-won progress made through high-level exchanges to thaw relations over the past 3 weeks or past few weeks. While that might be a price Washington is willing to pay to deter China's tech advancement, such an order and previous tech bans against Beijing could damage U.S.-China tech ties based on unfounded national security grounds. Washington wants it both ways. Through broader tech curbs, it intends to freeze Chinese technology and short-circuit Beijing's semiconductor ambitions. Meanwhile, its companies can still profit from the Chinese market. However, curb is a curb, and Washington's ever-growing restriction list is hardly popular among American business. U.S. tech and financial companies are voicing their concerns, fearing such curbs could send a chilling effect on cross-border investment in China. Microchip giants have been lobbying to curtail limitations to their operations in China for months, pressing the government to exercise restraint and weigh the curbs' impact at a recent White House meeting. The CEOs of 3 homegrown chip conglomerates, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, and Intel, have been cautioning against heavy-handedness on the U.S.'s most sweeping export controls yet, said Bloomberg. China also voiced its opposition shortly after the ban was rolled out. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce said the United States restricted outbound investments from its companies, pushing decoupling in the investment sector under the guise of de-risking, a complete departure from the principles of the market economy and fair competition that the United States has long championed. The Biden administration should know that stifling China will not help America run faster. The White House has been working to rejuvenate America's own chip-making industries and expand its tech edge. Unfortunately, it's not working as intended. American industrial nationalists dream of reshoring and rebranding their domestic chip sector. Good luck. So this is how direct they're becoming. This is how direct China is becoming, saying good luck. Many chip makers are looking outside of America for options. Intel Capital has on record hinted at more investments overseas than U.S. soil, saying the world has changed significantly and the hub of global tech innovation is no longer limited to Silicon Valley. Chances are more firms may follow Intel's steps away from Biden's longer-term goals of encouraging more chip manufacturing on U.S. soil, business insiders say. Even if the White House can expand American chip-making manufacturing capacities, the long rap sheet of chip export bans on China would render those efforts meaningless. Many of America's chip-making firms view China as their biggest market. Statistics show China accounts for around 30% of sales at Applied Materials, a quarter of Intel, 20% of NVIDIA, and 60% of sales at Qualcomm. Without orders from Chinese customers, there will be much less need to go ahead with projects such as Intel's planned factory complex in Ohio. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger reportedly told U.S. officials. The latest ban would give a fresh jolt to the global supply and industrial chains and risk further fragmenting the global economy. Additionally, it could harm America's economy. In recent years, the U.S. has courted its allies to quash China's tech advances and block Chinese tech cooperation with overseas partners. But shorting China will be costly. According to an internal company document obtained by the German news service Der Spiegel, it would cost the state-owned rail operator Deutsche Bahn up to 400 million euros if it had to replace all components supplied by Chinese telecom giant Huawei across its network. The IMF says the long-term cost of trade fragmentation alone could range from 0.2% of global output in a limited fragmentation scenario to almost 7% in a severe one. Another reason Washington's tech war against China will fail is China's unwavering determination to excel in high-tech development. With one hand, the U.S. government is blocking China's progress on AI and supercomputing, but on the other, it is ushering Chinese companies towards concentrating their efforts on chips for products of daily use. And in a world in which Chinese companies dominate production on mature chips, driven directly by American policy, hardly looks like a victorious outcome for the U.S. This was the New York Times. In today's world of hyper interdependence, it is impossible for the world's top two economies, which enjoy significant economic complementarity, to decouple from each other. So that's the warning. The warning is decoupling is not going to go well for the United States. That these corporations enjoy a significant return on investment through the Chinese market, and that there are significant costs. And this is one thing that is often not talked about when it comes to this economic war. And this is true with Russia too. But I think because China is such a manufacturing hub, and it now is a high-tech manufacturing hub, what ends up happening is that the reality of the economic landscape, which says China can produce things cheaper, it can produce things faster, that if you give that up, and instead go to the U.S. side, you're going to get a slower return on investment that is more costly. And that is what has happened with Europe and Russia, with Europe sanctioning Russia's energy and then replacing it with U.S. crude. The prices have gone up, and of course, the entire economy has not recovered in Europe. The U.S. corporations sell oil at exorbitant prices. And the same goes with tech. The investment is just much more costly. That is the reality, and it's going to affect the entire world economy, and indeed already has. And for however much China is slowed down by this process, it will not be slowed down to the point of no return. China is able to redirect its economy to be able to finish this process of self-reliance in the area of tech. It won't come as quickly, maybe, as China may hope. It takes time. There's patience that is needed. And indeed, the consequences of, for example, sanctions on Huawei have had consequences for China. When I was there, I was told that the Mate 15, the new Huawei phone, didn't have 5G technology because of the export ban on semiconductors, that Huawei wasn't able to get the sufficient number to put them in this new phone. And it looks like that is actually going to change, according to Reuters. I think Reuters published a week after I came back on the 11th of July. I think several days later, Reuters reported that actually now Huawei is starting to get things together. So that is the example, right? Huawei didn't have it, had to sell a phone with 4G technology behind progress of its other models, and then at the same time was able to hunker down and figure out how to do it itself so that it can produce 5G technology in its new phones. So China is not the problem here. It's not a ticking time bomb, right? China's economic growth is in fact real. It is on the road to recovery. Most economies worldwide have been in some form of stagnation or recession because it's a global economic slowdown. But China has certain advantages that the US doesn't have. And one of the big advantages that the economist admitted is the fact that, let's be honest here, China is not isolated. China is not isolated. China is able to increase trade, South-South cooperation with countries in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. The biggest trade deal does not reside among the Western countries, the collective West. It is the free trade agreement among the mainly Asian countries that make up the biggest free trade agreement in the world. So that is the reality, okay? That there is a new day here. China is being targeted more and more for economic warfare because it is actually succeeding. And its success in the tech sector is just one of the many quote unquote threats, the legitimate, I think, areas of concern for a hegemon, the United States, which sees any kind of progress by any sovereign country as the potential undoing of its rule around the world. And indeed, that's what is happening. And so just a couple of more things I'm just going to show you to underscore this point. So if you think war is going to happen against China anytime soon, well, China is getting prepared. A weapons breakthrough has been made in which it may be possible for Beijing to develop high-energy laser weapons that can shoot as long as their operators desire without any interruption in degradation and performance. And this is being researched by scientists at the National University of Defense Technology in Changsha, China, published the results of their research this month in Acta Optica Sinica, a peer-reviewed Chinese journal. They claim to have developed a new cooling system that makes it possible to operate high-energy lasers indefinitely without effects from overheating. It's a huge breakthrough in improving performance of high-energy laser systems. High-quality beams can be produced not only in the first second, but also maintained indefinitely. So if you think there's going to be a hot war based on this this tech war, this economic war the United States is waging, if you think it's going to slow down China's ability to defend itself, well, we have another thing coming. And then economically, it's not just that China is not isolated, but also it's that China is de-dollarizing, all right? China is diversifying gold, currency reserves, other currency reserves as the dollar becomes more risky. So China has continued its steady march toward de-dollarizing its economy, revealing on Monday that July has been the 9th straight month of gold purchases and that its foreign currency reserves are even higher than Western experts predicted. The People's Bank of China, the socialist state's central bank, said that last month it has purchased 23 tons or 740,000 troy ounces of gold bullion. That brings its total stockpile to its highest ever weight of 2,137 tons. Roughly 188 tons has been added amid a shopping spree that began last November. In addition, the People's Bank of China said that China's foreign currency reserves rose by 11.3 billion in July, racing to 3.02 trillion, higher than Western experts believed. So Chris Devonshire Ellis, chairman of Desin Shira and Associates, told who has a 30-year investment in business career in China, Russia, and Asia, told Sputnik on Wednesday that China was motivated primarily by economic stability, which the politicization of U.S. national debt has threatened. There are a couple of issues with this. They can't reduce their U.S. debt holdings by significant amounts at any one time, as this would depress the remaining values and upset the U.S. dollar trade balance, but they can do it gradually. It appears to be a long-term strategy and could take a couple of decades to convert their U.S. debt into other commodities under normal conditions. And that assumes that things are normal. But, you know, this is turbulent times. And, of course, the U.S. has actually been the one downgraded by Moody's from AAA to AA plus status of credit risk rating. So China is preparing, right? China is preparing for the end of U.S. hegemony because the end of U.S. hegemony is coming. This tech war is essentially, and this economic war is essentially about the decline of the United States as a hegemon and its shrinking share of the overall global economy. And it is trying to arrest that process by any means necessary. It won't work. It is not going to work. But at the same time, you have someone like Joe Biden, you have the neocon foreign policy establishment willing to push economic warfare no matter the cost and no matter the warnings that are being sounded by both the collective West itself, which is warning that more needs to be done if it's going to be effective, and China, of course, which is saying, be careful what you wish for, be careful what you do, because you might not like it. You might end up actually eating a Satan sandwich. So we're going to move from the economic war to the question of Taiwan, but it's going to remain on this theme of economics, because the economic war is leaking into the US's military strategy against China. Before I get to that, though, hit that like button, hit that notification, subscribe button. So hit the like button. Let me see what our ratio is at. We have 2,200 viewers, 1,500, 1,600 likes. So a good ratio. Keep hitting that like button if you're able to keep boosting the stream. But I appreciate all of you have come. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Thank you to the moderators. I will do more shout outs at the end. So let me just get a drink of water because I've been talking for a while. All right. When I watch Garland Nixon, he goes for like an hour straight plus sometimes. And I'm always curious about how he doesn't drink water while he's doing it. I'm always drinking water. It's just like, it just gets so dry. All right. So thank you, Desert Mantis. See the plug in the chat. Thank you so much, Desert Mantis, for that plug. And everyone stick around. I'm about to get to this next story here. Let me just pull it up, okay? So the United States is once again escalating with China on the question of Taiwan. And oftentimes when we talk about escalations relating to Taiwan, we are talking about political and military provocations. And those indeed are continuing. The United States has not let up its constant sailing of warships and flying of spy planes over the Taiwan Straits. No, it has not done that. The United States has also not revoked any of its promises to arm Taiwan. You have about 19 billion US dollars in overall arms sales, many of which is backlogged. But you also have new drawdown authority being asserted by Biden, the same authority that he has asserted with Ukraine, in order to endlessly arm Taiwan as a porcupine ready to defend the island against China, which is a euphemism for ready to fight a war against China on behalf of the United States. Of course, this is all fantasy, and this is not a reality. The reality is that any kind of hot war, hot conflict between the United States and China would inevitably go nuclear, because neither country has any kind of interest in waging a long war like the one that is going on in Ukraine, and violating the one China principle that the United States would be doing if it engaged in such a conflict would be a breach of international law and would essentially hold much bigger ramifications than even what is going on in Ukraine, believe it or not. But now the Biden administration is not just escalating militarily on the question of Taiwan. It is ramping up the economic war with China around Taiwan. So it's almost a double dip here. It is that the United States is saying that not only is it going to militarize the island, which is internationally recognized as part of China, but it's also going to engage in economic relations that signal independence. And it is making China furious, and understandably so. So, Joe Biden has signed a law approving a U.S.-Taiwan trade agreement to boost bilateral economic ties. Now, mind you, bilateral means between nations generally. That is international law speak. So you don't generally have bilateral relations with the territory of a sovereign country. So that's just the first thing. But the agreement covers streamlining customs procedures, combating corruption, and helping small businesses navigate regulatory procedures in both markets. Legislative branch authority asserted as law requires U.S. Trade Representative to brief Congress on negotiations with Taiwan. So according to the South China Morning Post, the U.S. President Joe Biden signed into law a bill that approves the first agreement negotiated under the U.S.-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade and commits the administration to consult Congress for future agreements under the initiative. The agreement, which was signed originally June 1st, covers streamlining customs procedures, combating corruption, helping small businesses navigate regulatory procedures in each market. It broadly aims to strengthen the U.S.-Taiwan trade and economic relationship, but does not include any market access provisions. Again, this is very common for the United States. What that means is that the United States is kind of dictating economic relations singularly. This is why it's the hegemon. Taiwan is simply and merely a territory of China that is unfortunately under the reign and rule of an authority that is claiming independence or trying to claim independence. Not so subtly, but as subtly, I guess, as you can expect. Nonetheless, it is the first of several agreements expected under this trade initiative, a framework for bilateral talks jointly launched by the two sides of June last year. The bill, called the United States-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade Agreement Implementation Act, was first announced in June by leaders of the Senate Finance Committee and the House and Ways Means Committee. It passed the House the same month and the Senate in July. Republican Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri, the sponsor of the House version and chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, said last week the bill was headed to the president's desk that, quote, China continues to threaten American interests and Taiwan has maintained a close relationship with America. This legislation strengthens that relationship with this vital ally and ensures the American people have a powerful voice through their representatives in future trade negotiations. Observers noted that the bill was much more about asserting congressional authority over trade policy as it was about showing support for enhanced engagement with Taiwan. The new law requires the U.S. Trade Representative to show and allow Congress to review any future negotiating texts of the initiative before sharing with Taiwan, share any texts drafted by Taiwan within 3 days, and provide daily briefings to Congress for initiating negotiating rounds. It also requires the future agreements not to take effect unless the U.S. president makes the text publicly available 60 days before entering the deal and a bill approving it is enacted into law. In a statement on Monday, Biden voiced concern over a portion of the law. In cases where the requirements of Section 7 of the Act would intermissibly infringe upon my constitutional authority to negotiate with a foreign partner, my administration will treat them as non-binding. So the argument is not, first of all, you can tell that there is some partisanship happening here. There's some clashing. The Republican majority Congress wants to weaken the Democratic Party president's power to negotiate with Taiwan. I could also see that, too, as trying to be careful about how these negotiations are actually taking place because they're literally playing with fire with China here. But I don't give them the benefit of the doubt there, especially the rabidly anti-China Republican faction of the Neocon foreign policy establishment. But Joe Biden here once again reinforces, and remember, it's Joe Biden that has said more than 4 times now that the United States is ready to defend Taiwan from China, meaning that the United States will militarily intervene when it deems it necessary to do so. This is also the same Biden administration which did nothing to stop Pelosi from visiting Taiwan, did nothing to prevent Kevin McCarthy from meeting with Tsai Ing-wen in California, and is doing nothing to stop Lee Ching-te, the candidate for the Democratic Progressive Party, the current ruling party of Taiwan's authority, from visiting the United States on his way to, I believe it's going to be Paraguay or Peru. later this month, later in August 2023. The Biden administration has supported these pro-independence initiatives from the beginning. So both chambers are now considering the bill authorizing administration to negotiate a tax agreement with Taipei that would offer residents in the U.S. and Taiwan relief from double taxation. The bill cleared a key Senate committee last month. So there's obviously moves to make official ties, economic ties with Taiwan. And of course, China has sent a stern warning against such an action, and rightfully so, because calling relations with Taiwan bilateral, cosplaying the fact that this is a partner, is reifying and reinforcing the notion that Taiwan is independent. Taiwan is not a nation, and not even the so-called Constitution of the Republic of China makes any indication of that occurring. And we should note that China's red line is independence, any kind of declaration of independence. And should that happen, China sees it as a duty to militarily intervene to prevent such a scenario. And that is the policy. And so really the policy is military intervention is the last straw to protect and defend its sovereignty. But nonetheless, China has to warn, and it is warning the United States to revoke this reckless trade act. And here is what the China side had to say. China urges the U.S. to revoke the so-called U.S.-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade First Agreement Implementation Act. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said. The spokesperson made the remarks in response to a query of the U.S.'s signing into law the so-called act. China strongly opposes official interaction of any form between China's Taiwan region and countries that have diplomatic relations with China. That includes negotiating or signing any agreement with implication of sovereignty or of official nature. The U.S. move violates the One China principle in the 3 China-U.S. joint communiques, contravenes its own commitment to maintaining only unofficial relations with Taiwan, and sends a wrong message to separatist forces seeking Taiwan independence, the spokesperson said. The spokesperson said China is unwavering in its resolve to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity, urging the United States for a course correction immediately, to revoke the so-called act, to stop pushing forward negotiations on the so-called initiative, and to stop going down the wrong path. So indeed, the United States is going down the wrong path here. Let me end the share. And now Taiwan of course, Taiwan has always been part of this economic war. TSMC, the major manufacturing hub of semiconductor chips worldwide, but really the heart and soul of the economy in Taiwan, is caught up in this as well. The head of TSMC had to say that no, it's not going to move its operations out of Taiwan, because there have been suspicions and murmurs that perhaps Taiwan is literally going to outsource its entire semiconductor industry to the U.S. to reap short-term benefits and profits, of course, for the from a gargantuan U.S. contracts, but essentially strip Taiwan of its entire economy, and that would lead to recession. And I've had Xiang Yu, who right now is currently in Taiwan doing his mandatory service. He has said as much, that this economic war around chips is really about stripping Taiwan of its ability to produce these chips, bringing that to the United States as part of a way to weaken China. So Taiwan is not simply a friend, and no matter how much the United States tries to posit this. In fact, everything that the United States is doing around Taiwan only leaves the island of Taiwan more likely to be caught in the crossfire of what really is a U.S. directed war. But nonetheless, it's not just because we can't talk about economic war and Taiwan without also talking about the fact that there is an election coming up in Taiwan. So this coming January 2024, the regional presidential election is going to occur. And there have been a lot of things said, and I've had many people on this channel comment on this upcoming election. And it's a very complicated issue and situation because on the one hand, the DPP, the ruling party, is rightfully seen as politically illegitimate at this point. There are many people who are unhappy on Taiwan Island, on the island of Taiwan, with its rule, not least because there's been a lot of focus on provocation with China, not a lot of focus on the problems happening in Taiwan. Sound a little bit familiar to all of us, all of my viewers in the collective West right now? But I want to show you a provocation that's kind of happening in league with this economic tensions because I think it goes along with the problem here. So Lai, Mr. Lai, Ching-te Lai, I think his name is, Lai Ching-te, he is going to visit the United States. All right. So here's the Global Times report. The DPP candidate Lai's stopover in the U.S. is going to cause new tension. Washington's encouragement for Taiwan secessionists will add new difficulties to mainland peace efforts. And here you have civil groups protesting on Taiwan last May, opposing Taiwan secessionism. And the sign reads, the U.S. act of the warmonger of inciting conflicts and making troubles to harm Taiwan. So that was happening in May in opposition to what was another visit, another official visit to the United States. This time it was Tsai Ing-wen. So the election is coming up in January 2024, and the Taiwan Secessionist Democratic Progressive Party's candidate for this regional election, Lai Ching-te, also deputy regional leader, will make stopovers in New York and San Francisco during his August 12th to 18th trip to Paraguay, the Taiwan External Affairs Authority announced on Wednesday. However, this will become a new incident to worsen tension in the Taiwan Straits and another evidence of the U.S.'s encouragement toward Taiwan secessionism, which is absolutely contradictory to the U.S.'s promises of opposing Taiwan independence. And the reason why I'm reading this article is to give you an understanding of how complicated the political situation is on Taiwan right now. Taiwan observers are also concerned the incident will seriously impact the regional leader's campaign next year. Cao Zhengliang, a Taiwan political scientist and former politician, told media that the DPP candidate's activity in the U.S. will definitely bring a response from the Chinese mainland. For Lai's rivals in the campaign, this could be a chance to overturn the situation as Lai is still the frontrunner in the polls. Other analysts said Lai could use his U.S. stopover to maximize his advantages if his opponents fail to grab the opportunity to expose Lai's dangerous nature to Taiwan voters. So that's the thing, is that people in Taiwan, Chinese people in Taiwan, are indeed angry about these provocations. They don't agree. Most people don't want a war. Most people are for the status quo that has been shown over and over and over again in many different polls, many different, and I'll show you some of these actually, okay? Because there is indeed a push in Taiwan for something different. I don't think that the majority of people want a war with China. However, the political conditions are quite complicated. And before I get to the polling numbers, because I will have to find them, but let's get to the rest of the article before I get into the fact that there actually is increasing tensions about this policy. So at present, there are three major political parties on the island of Taiwan, and they have all nominated their candidates for the election, with some media observers on the island claiming that this is a war versus peace campaign. Many are concerned that if Lai wins the election, Taiwan authorities will become even more extreme in seeking secessionism, forcing the Chinese mainland to solve the Taiwan question through more direct means. Each time Taiwan enters an election campaign, the U.S., as always, plays a key role in manipulating public opinion and the political landscape within the island. In the past, when anti-secessionist forces have control over the island, the U.S. interrupts cross-strait cooperation and exchanges by all means, including instigating color revolutions, such as the Sunflower Movement. That was around, I think, 10 years ago. When the secessionist authorities rule the island, the U.S. uses its advantages in both hard and soft power to encourage Taiwan secessionists to provoke and offend the mainland in the name of democracy. This is why the mainland finds that there is a limit to pushing peaceful reunification by merely providing economic interests in sharing development benefits with the island to make the island more intertwined, so that political negotiation for a solution on the Taiwan question will take place, and then we can realize reunification peacefully. So that's the thing, is that while, and this is a huge point, it is true that economic ties between the mainland and Taiwan are really robust. But because of the political manipulation, it hasn't had the effect politically as you might think, right? That there has been a push to move public opinion toward independence. No matter which party rules the island, they are unable to or have no sincerity to push political negotiation with the mainland when it comes to reunification. Meanwhile, they are reluctant to give up the benefit from trade and people-to-people exchanges with the mainland. The U.S.'s interruption and Taiwan's secessionist hostility toward the mainland are among the main reasons for tensions in the Taiwan Straits, and is the main obstacle for peaceful reunification. And it would be ridiculous to blame the mainland over the worsening situation, because the mainland has remained restrained and patient. This is from a professor at the Taiwan Research Center, SGMN University, Li Fei. So, according to one Beijing-based expert on Taiwan studies, the military drills and other relevant activities conducted by the PLA around the island were forced from provocations made by the U.S. and Taiwan secessionists. And if we can realize reunification peacefully by economic integration, why would we choose a costly and dangerous military solution? And that's indeed true. China, each time Pelosi and then Kevin McCarthy conducted live fire drills, surrounded the island, mimicked what a blockade would look like of Taiwan should the U.S. be the invader, right? Because this is the U.S. invading. Let's get it out of our heads that China would be the one invading. The U.S. would be invading because the U.S. is stepping outside of its sovereign territory to interfere in the affairs of another country. And each time that happened, it was because the U.S. had essentially facilitated meetings of an official nature with Taiwan's political establishment. On July 23rd, the KMT, the main opposition party on the island, formally nominated Hui Yui to be the candidate for 2024 election, with Hui claiming that the KMT will keep opposing Taiwan independence. But polls conducted by many Taiwan media and institutions shows that Hui has only around 20 to 24%, standing in third place. Another opposition party candidate, Kuo Wen-jae of Taiwan People's Party, enjoys 25 to 28% ranks and is in second place, with Lai on top at about 35%. So there you have it. You have actually the polls showing in Taiwan that it is not the KMT that is actually winning, or that is actually has an advantage right now. In fact, what is happening is that Taiwan politically is so manipulated, is so interfered with, and there has been such a huge push to there is such a huge push for independence that still, despite all of the misgivings of the DPP, despite all the misgivings with it, it still leads. And that this mimics kind of the political situation that you have in the United States, with no matter how bad things become, polls tend to suggest that like incumbents still are leading. And that's because the political situation is so manipulated, people have so little hope, and perhaps the political parties are so untrustworthy that people tend to vote based on that rather than maybe specific and concrete interests. So the reasons why the KMT candidate is struggling to win popular support are complicated, including a lack of solidarity within the party and Huo's shortcomings as a candidate, and many young voters feeling exhausted over choosing between the KMT and DPP. Thus, many of them will disapprove of the DPP, will tend to give their votes to the emerging Taiwan People's Party, said observers in Taiwan who are reached by the Global Times. So, in effect, the vote is split. However, it's dangerous that if the challengers that aim to end the DPP's ruling fail to stand together and fail to win a majority, as the anti-DPP vote will become divided, DPP's Lai, who styles himself as pragmatic worker of Taiwan independence, will become the next regional leader and create dangerous uncertainty to the cross-straits situation in the future. So the Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation, so this is what I was going to get to. A nonprofit organization on the island and a major polling agency published a poll on May 12th that showed 47.2% of Taiwan residents want to end DPP rule, while 41.7% accepted the DPP to stay in power. On July 23rd, the organization published another poll that showed 49% disagree with the DPP's policy in governing Taiwan under Tsai Ing-wen's authority. However, despite the majority of Taiwan voters expressing disappointment over the DPP's poor governance over the last 8 years, the DPP candidate remains more popular than his two major opponents. The main reason is that the two candidates have divided the voters who disapprove of the DPP, but another reason is that Lai holds a key to maintain approval rating, claiming that the 2024 election is a democracy versus authoritarian campaign or a Washington versus Beijing campaign. So another interesting poll from the TPOF on June 28th, who's the U.S. most favorite candidate of the 2024 election? The results show that 54% of Taiwan participants believe that Lai is the U.S.'s choice, with Ko and Huo only getting 12% each. Lai recently told the media that Taiwan media and politicians should not question or criticize the U.S. because the U.S. has defended Taiwan for decades and helped Taiwan develop its economy, and it's the mainland that tries to annex Taiwan, noting that the U.S. wouldn't like a pro-mainland regime on the island. So there you have it. So you have a divided vote, okay? And this goes on and on and on. But you have a divided vote, okay, among the opposition. So it's bad news, really, for the Taiwan question, the situation, the conflict that the U.S. is waging against China, using Taiwan as a proxy. But at the same time, the good news is that more and more people on the island are showing through these polls, through the Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation, that indeed there's not a lot of appetite for the policies of the DPP right now. So how that contradiction is going to play out officially remains to be seen. It is very possible that the DPP wins again, but I don't think that this sentiment is going to go away. And it's not a given that they'll win. There's still a lot of time between now and January 2024. And of course, Lai Ching-te's visit to the United States is going to pour fuel on the fire. Can these candidates take advantage of this? Can they highlight the fact that the One China principle is being soiled upon, is being destroyed, not just by these official visits, but also by this key legislation in the realm of economics, which posits that Taiwan is some kind of official bilateral economic partner to the United States, which on the one hand is a dangerous provocation and violation of the One China principle, and on the other, we have to question whether this really is going to work out in Taiwan's favor, getting closer to the United States at the expense of relations with China. I don't believe it will. I believe that China and Taiwan have complementarity and have a lot that they can continue to build together as one territory on the road to reunification, rather than a path that is being chosen by the United States for Taiwan to separate from China and essentially spark a war. That is the ultimate goal of the United States. Make no mistake about it. And it's not because the United States just wants to blow up the world. It is because the United States sees no other option, that there's only one real area of potential conflict to begin, and that is over the Taiwan Straits crisis. This isn't the first time. In the 1950s, there were two Taiwan Straits crises, and both of those led to near nuclear war, of course, waged by the United States. China did not have a nuclear bomb until 1964. But a big reason why China built one is because it was threatened twice with nuclear conflict. And so, remember, you might remember Dean Acheson and these rabid neocons as part of the U.S.'s regime that was doing the same during the Korean War, the invasion of Korea, and of course was ramping up hostilities with the Soviet Union after the official dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan, which was a message to the Soviet Union of what the U.S. can do should the Soviet Union try it. Essentially, it was a threat as much as it was a weapon to use to, it wasn't to end the war because the Soviet Union was about to end it, was marching on Manchuria, but it was essentially the parting call of the United States in the war to say, this is the next phase. The next phase is for us to use nuclear armaments against the real enemy, which was the Soviet Union. That was the basis of the Cold War. And so we're in that situation, a similar situation now, and it's only going to get more dangerous. And so this economic war that now includes Taiwan, and it's continued to include Taiwan more and more so, the more that the United States entangles the island of Taiwan into its economic vice grip, the more that it tries to squeeze every ounce and bit out of Asia and Taiwan specifically for influence and dominance economically, the more that the political and military situation around the Taiwan question will deteriorate because it's all interconnected. And so we will have to see what happens in January, but we do know that there's going to be another official visit. We don't know if Lai Ching-te is going to meet with anybody, but we know he's coming. And we know that it's only going to worsen the situation diplomatically, politically, and militarily between China and the United States. And that is bad news. The good news, though, is that you're watching this program and that you're becoming more aware of this problem so that we can spread the word and change public opinion for the better so that we can move toward actual peace with justice in our time from a geopolitical perspective, as much as we are trying to, and hopefully trying to do so in all realms of political life. So that's it. That's it for the content today, everyone. What a great stream. 2 hours. We have still 1,800 viewers on here. Thank you so much. I'm going to do some shout outs. And of course, I'll repeat the announcements that I did at the beginning of the show. Man, how are you all doing? Okay, so before we get to shout outs, quick announcements. I was going to stream tomorrow. I actually had guests coming on. I'm not even going to, so I was going to have Margaret and Gerald Horn on, but because of personal circumstances tomorrow, I have to take care of some things. I will not be able to stream tomorrow night. But with that said, I'll postpone that. They will be on, Gerald Horn and Margaret Kimberly, at another time. And it'll be great when it does happen. But yeah, so no stream tomorrow, but Tuesday I'm collaborating with Radii, with the Iron Mike, Dana Burton, Radii, which is partly run by Brian Wong, who was a former assistant to Jack Ma at Alibaba. We are going to stream together. Carl Zha will be a special guest. We are going to stream together after the conclusion of Warrior. I believe season 3 is concluding. We're going to have a stream on Chinatown in China then and now, and we're going to talk about basically Warrior, how Warrior relates to this overall situation that we find ourselves in relating to China. Of course, Carl will bring his historical perspective. Dana, Burton, and Brian will bring their perspectives from China. Dana being he's a music kind of curator. He does a lot of business in China around hip hop and music. Brian Wong, of course, runs his media company and has been deep in the tech sector in China. He's also has deep experience in the United States and can speak to this issue of being Chinese and also being American and what that means. And I'll talk about geopolitics. So of course it'll stay on that path too. I'll talk about geopolitics and what I think is really important about understanding the history of China so we don't repeat the same mistakes. I will be going off the cuff for that for about 10-15 minutes or so, and we will be having a conversation. It will be about an hour long, I believe, starting at 10 p.m. Eastern time. And yeah, so that will be great. That will be, it's a special thing. So save the date, 10 p.m. Eastern. We will have a good time. And let's do it. Let's make sure that we're all here, 10 p.m. Tuesday evening. I may come on. I may do like a parallel stream right beforehand if I have the time. I'm thinking about it. So let's see. But in any event, there are other announcements to be made. And let's see, where should I begin? So Thursday, I'm going to be speaking at the UN Security Council for a briefing on the arming of Ukraine. I will be speaking for about 10 minutes or so on that issue, beginning at 3 p.m. Eastern. And hopefully I'll have that video to republish. So that will be great. It'll be a great opportunity. I'm a bit nervous about it. I'll definitely prepare some remarks and be sure that they fall within the time range. I am someone who tends to speak less than given, so I'm going to actually try not to do that. But nonetheless, and I'm definitely going to try to set a stopwatch to make sure that I'm speaking the full amount, because I definitely want to get out the good word more, at least to the time that I am allotted. So that's going to be great. That's coming up on Thursday. So stream on Tuesday. And what else is there? That on Thursday. Brian Berletic on Sunday. So Sunday after tomorrow, not this coming Sunday. Reschedule Margaret and Gerald Horn. Of course, you all have heard that Scott Ritter has been censored off of this platform. And so I do plan to have him on as soon as I can. Schedule, unfortunately, is not allowing it soon. But just know that that is heavily opposed here. Friend of the show. We've done a lot of great work together. So that collaboration will continue. And we will continue to talk about that issue here regardless. So that's the short of it, I believe. Unless I forgot an announcement I announced earlier. Oh, also we're celebrating 80,000 subscribers. Okay, so we're ahead of 80,000 now. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do so, because we are on that path, and I thought I wasn't going to see it until well into the winter next year, maybe further on, but at the current pace, it's looking like it'll be coming soon, possibly in the next couple of months. So, the next 3 to 4 or 5 months, depending on how things go on the channel in the preceding days and weeks ahead. But nonetheless, this has been an incredible experience. I want to thank everyone who has made the growth possible, who come to these streams, whether I'm by myself, whether I have a guest that you all enjoy. This is all about collaboration, and I see you all as viewers as a big part of that, which is why I try to be as interactive as possible, and hopefully we'll get more interactive, especially for paid members who do so generously support my work. But of course, I do not really paywall content, so all of you viewers do basically get the full scope of the work that I do. So thank you so much for that. Thanks all to the moderators. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Now I'm going to get to super chats, and of course I'll be shouting out members as well. I'll run through the chat there, and I will also answer any questions. I'll stay on for a few minutes to do that if you have any. And let's go. So Steve is a new member. Stephen C. Salute to you. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your membership. Salt Thrower gave 1,000 yen. Thank you so much for your membership and your super chat. And we have Mooney Rich giving $2 super sticker. Great. So, we have Dwayne Vogel, who is also a member. saying thank you, appreciate you and your membership as well. Oh man, it's funny. I wish I could show. Someone asked, does Eugene ever wonder why Daddy talks to a bright screen? Well, it was just funny. Just a second ago, he was looking really funny at me, because usually this, at this time he's looking at like, are we gonna go to the bedroom? Now he's sleeping. Let's see. Also, there was rain and it was hitting the air conditioner, and I gotta fix that issue because I used to have air conditioner covers, and then we moved for the millionth time. Completely forgot about the covers. I think they even broke. They were cheap stuff. So I got to get new ones and apply them. And anyway, he's scared of the pitter patter, loud noise. Anyway, so thanks, Notary. Also, I know that you do moderating. So thank you so much for the congratulations. Anything else? I don't see any other questions. No. Dwayne Vogel says Warriors great. Well, I hope to see you at that stream. It's going to be a little bit shorter of a stream. I'm actually going to ask them how short they want it to be. Personally, I like to go a little longer than an hour, but let's see if I can convince any of them to have maybe Carl. I can take off the whatchamacallit, the gloves with Carl. So drink, Daddy. Yeah. Nah, I don't drink, but I do some other stuff. So, well, not hard stuff, but you know what I mean. I'm not gonna air out my laundry here, but I will celebrate a little bit after this. So let's see. It's funny, the chilling effect. One thing I was just thinking about when Scott Ritter was banned is I got messages being like, "Hey, you're gonna take down your videos with Scott Ritter?" I'm like, "No, I wouldn't do that." If I get banned, everybody, and I'm gonna just send it out like that. That is a real, like, even though my initial reaction was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to take down videos. The chilling effect when a particular individual is targeted is that it could happen to us. And this has been a reality since the beginning of this channel. Remember, Lee Camp and so many others had their YouTube channels taken down immediately when the conflict in Ukraine really started to heat up and the US and NATO were ramping up sanctions on Russia. One of the sanctions was on the information sphere, and the witch hunt of anyone that had relationships with Russian media, that was peripheral to Russian media at all, were taken down. And so this channel is not necessarily safe, which means everyone who's watching and listening to this, go, if forget the paid options, please do support me if you can. But in the video description, there is a link tree with my Telegram, and I believe the links on under my channel banner also has a Telegram link, t.me/DannyHaifa. Download Telegram. Make sure you're subscribed there, because that is my backup for social media, following me. But also, of course, I'm on Rockfin. That is my backup for video content. You can follow me on Rockfin as well. Just search my name. But furthermore, while I am so happy about the success of this channel, I am not naive. And should this channel get taken down, maybe I will come back fresh. Or maybe I'm going to go back to written journalism and just complement and supplement with videos. Because, to be frank, they're just, maybe I'll go to Rumble specifically and exclusively, but, it's not set in stone. And so this is to say that all of these media efforts, I'll never quit the media sphere, but, it's so important to support in all ways possible and to make sure you're following in all ways possible, so that one platform is not what we're relying upon, even as this one grows. So, I am so pleased by the growth of this one. With any event, that is what I got for you. Uh, so I see a lot of conversation in the chat. People say, "Why self-ban?" I'm not gonna self-ban. I mean, I'll do video work. I just don't, the amount of effort and it's just I'm someone I do video. I have transitioned here and I am happy to be here. But I am also someone who does print journalism, who does writing, who likes to diversify things. So it's not like I haven't considered, being more diverse in my content. But I'm only one person, so I tend to just stick with what's working and continue to go with it. But if this suddenly doesn't work anymore, well then, of course I'll put up a huge campaign. If I get censored, I'll try to regain, but that's a lot of stress and a lot of labor. So there's a lot of considerations here, but just do know that there is this campaign going on. It's affected Scott Ritter. It's affected so many others. It is part and parcel of a larger surveillance campaign, a campaign of repression against anti-war voices. It is a McCarthyist campaign. It is a Cold War campaign. And it is one that is having real and true significant impacts. It is one that has consequences that are less seen, let's say algorithmically, and ones that are more seen, like being removed, and ones that are even more significant that just don't get the attention they deserve, like Julian Assange being tortured for simply doing journalism. This is the state of the empire in decline, of the collective West in free fall, and things are going to get rougher. So for all of you who are watching, I really appreciate the support, and let's keep going for as long as we can keep going and continue the work, and no matter in what capacity we do it in. And for me, I tend to not follow the chilling effect. Like, I'm not here to sanitize myself because these things happen. I don't think that would be right, but it is a legitimate thought that comes into our heads. It's not, I've heard from so many people over the last 2 years, since February 22. So I guess less than 2 years, but almost for the last 2 years, talk about this in this way. Nadia says, "Are you planning on meeting any communist people in Vietnam?" Well, I mean, I will be meeting with some official organizations like the Friendship Association. I will assume that since Vietnam is ruled by a communist party, the CPV, the Communist Party of Vietnam, that there will be party members. So a lot of the tour will be centered on the impacts of the Vietnam War on Vietnam. But I do hope to have other conversations as well about geopolitics, about Vietnam's role, its development, etc. And I hope to find people who are open to talking about that. I hope to perhaps meet up with Luna Oi if possible. I will reach out to her because she is a YouTuber from Vietnam. We will be in Da Nang, and let's see if we can do it. Where says Danny is chill, but he doesn't get chilled. Very good, very good. Notary, thank you so much for the super sticker as we conclude here. I'm just looking at the chat now. All right, everybody. You all have been great. Somebody asked if I'm doing YouTube full time. No, I mean, I'm doing it full time. I'm doing it. My media is mostly this now. I mean, I do write some. I actually have an article due. Oh God, don't get me started. I think more than a week, thankfully. Usually it's for CGTN. Usually they ask me for some pieces. Usually they ask me for like 2-day turnaround. I'm like, oh God, I do not have the time for that. But I have an article due soon. So I'm still writing a bit. I'm hoping to turn a speech I gave today into an article I'm also hoping to turn my UN Security Council remarks into an article. But no, this is what I'm doing with most of my media time. But that's not full time per se. Believe it or not, I do also work part time as a psychotherapist and as a social worker, and that is, the field I went into years ago, and it's one that I continue to stay in because I paid a lot of money for school to go to do this, and also I still need the supplementary income for now. But I'm also not convinced about completely quitting that field yet. Maybe in the future, maybe not. It depends on how things go here. It also depends on how I feel about that work, which changes all the time, honestly. Sometimes I feel good about it, sometimes I don't. But that's just how it is. It's the contradictions. So I don't see any more questions. Some people are asking me questions that I don't, it takes too long to get into the whole answer. Use some of your conversations here as articles. Yeah, no, I could transcribe, but that's also a lot of time. I'm in a time crunch because I'm going to throw this out there to all of you so it's not just that I work part-time and that I do media, but I'm also kind of a domestic laborer, meaning that I guess you call a house husband if we want to use the archaic terms, which if you read Karl Marx, is real labor. So I have a lot of responsibilities in that area to keep things going. And as you know, I have a dog, and I do take up almost majority of responsibilities there. Not all. We are collaborative, but given that my wife works overnights as a nurse, that's just the way it goes. So in effect, time is not as bountiful as I would like it to be. I often find myself wondering, where has it gone? Somebody say, well, I give Uncle Joe therapy. No, for ethical reasons, I would not serve Uncle Joe Biden. Uncle Joe Biden, first of all, Uncle Joe Biden is not a candidate for therapy because he has cognitive problems that require other kinds of treatment and other kinds of socialization. But in reality, he deserves a prison. Honestly, he is a war criminal. I see some trolls in the chat. Somebody said sex worker knew it. No, I don't got an OF or anything like that. Only fans. So yeah, Ben Noren was right. It would be better to live where the cost of living is cheaper. I could do this full time, but at the same time, it's like I have commitments here in the United States, family, my wife's family, somewhat my own family, but also, I do have a commitment here to get the message out here. I don't judge anyone that leaves, and I think that you can still do incredible work away, but I still hold true to the fact that we need people here to be spreading the good word. And wow, the Dominican music is blasting. I hope that StreamYard's ability to block that out is happening, but there is blasting Dominican music outside. So Jill is a failure. Joe Biden's a failure as a therapist. I mean, is Jill Biden even a therapist? A lot of people, she's a PhD, but is she a therapist? That's interesting. I don't trust her as a therapist, honestly. I wouldn't trust her. I thought she was in education. She's an education person. She's not a therapist, just looking at her wiki. So Joe Biden is just a PhD. Don't confuse PhDs with therapists now. All right, everybody. I'm really procrastinating leaving the stream. That's how much fun I have on these streams. But it's about to end soon. I see Alex from Reportify. Welcome. Might have to catch the replay. Sorry. But you just all gave me the great idea. I'm gonna send a message to the Radii folks and see if we can get the stream to be a little longer. I would like, first of all, I'd like more time with Carl afterward. I want to see if I can get a deal with them. Because the video could be cut up later. They could split it in half for their own purposes. Let's see. I am not an abused house husband. This was my choice. I used to work full-time plus this, and then it just got out of control. And my wife was in school, and I was supporting her. And then when she got a job, we were like, okay, let's try to reverse this. You know, and it has its very positive qualities, and also it's something I'm just not used to. I've always worked and worked and worked, and I've never been like a professional journalist, so to speak. So it's taken some time to get used to. I've caught a groove in the media, like doing this work, but I can tell you, outside of this, it is not a well-oiled machine. Like, I'm still learning how to divide my time, how to get back into things, how to organize a schedule when you don't have the 9 to 5 or 9 to 5 plus kind of organizing your life for you. It is hard work, but I especially when you have a lot of work to do, because I still work part-time and I still do this work. So it's not like I basically have a full-time working schedule. People are funny. So, video clips of the dog. More dog, I guess. All right. I'll go to his, let me go to his channel. All right, let me go to his channel. I've been practicing recall with him, so you'll get to see some highlights of his recall. And then I will leave you all with that, because I am very proud of his progress in this way. So let me share the Instagram with all of you. If you want to rake up clicks and views, always show the dog. Yeah, I need to what do I need to do? So here he is. Here are the videos. I need to make a separate, people are already saying to me, Danny, your third job is going to be, and this is just twisted. Like, it's going to be, you're going to become a dog trainer. And I'm like, I don't know about that one, but here's a video I'll share with you. I don't know if you can hear that. I can't hear anything. Here's the volume. Okay, let me replay that after it plays. So there he is coming.
Eugene, come. Yes, good boy. Good boy.
So there you go. There's him. There's him going on recall. What I love is the tail. You can see the tail go from down to up as he runs toward me. And here's another one.
Eugene, come. Yes.
There he is. So there you go. Some recall videos. And then I will show, so here is him really tired after one of our walks. Literally plopping down before I have the chance to tell him, go back to your spot. You know, and some little basic stuff here. Here's him staying.
Okay. Good boy.
That's working on what's called threshold. So threshold just meaning you basically the threshold is what they can tolerate in terms of impulse control, and then you have a little cue to release them. And I think I showed you some of the, I mean, these are just pictures of him, right? A lot of videos. I don't want to show too many videos now, but let me. So here is his costume on Halloween. He was Spock. So he was not very happy in this costume, but there you go. There he was last Halloween in a Spock uniform. There was us on the road in Tennessee. This was a while ago. This was last year, November. So there he is with his eyes closed. All right, so those are some older videos. Here he is out in upstate New York watching the sun set. And sitting in New York, not too happy actually. He wanted to go home pretty badly there. This is him, an old photo of him snuggling on the couch in his spot. So there you go. All right. There you go. That's the dog. That is my son. That is my son. So yeah, no, I've been very happy with this progress. Actually, you might see this here. So I took him to a field in my neighborhood that I don't take him to very often. Unfortunately, he went above threshold, got the zoomies. He was on that leash arrangement that I showed, but I was a little worried about him getting away because he had the zoomies. Because once dogs get the zoomies, they often cannot follow commands anymore. So I had to step on the leash. I stepped on it funny. I fell on my front and skidded my arm. So that was fun. But he did so well for the first many times doing recall. But it was a little hot. I think I pushed him a little too hard. So he went zoom, and I went kaboom. So that was the deal. And what's a zoomie? Zoomies are when dogs essentially, it's just something in their brain. It can happen because they're annoyed. It can happen because they're overstimulated. But it happens to a lot of dogs where they go into kind of a mental state of hyper arousal where they can't calm down. And they're basically, it's like a huge release of energy. You might see it on reels on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or wherever you watch reels. If you do YouTube shorts, you might see dogs running around. And that's zoomies is not a scientific term. It's just what a lot of people use. I try to keep him under that at all times because they're not conducive to training. They're normal, but if they're because of your training, then you're doing something wrong, and I was doing something wrong. So, in any event, yes. Yeah, no, I mean, zoomies are like normal for a dog like mine that is so many working breeds in it. Zoomies are not ideal because they're a work breed and it can turn into reactivity and all kinds of other things. It really depends on the dog. And for us, our dog, Zoomies, this was from Standing Alone, who is a big supporter of the channel. So that's why I'm referencing it. I'm missing the comment. Hi, Sherry. Welcome. It's a member. I can't find what you were saying, Standing Alone. But where are you? The chat's going fast still because we still have 1,300 people on the stream listening to me talk about dogs. So you talk about your dog Standing Alone. The zoomies are the only time. I'm guessing Mocha is your dog. Runs full speed. It's good exercise. Yeah, no, it's the same. Because I live in a city, I can't really give those opportunities as much as I would like because I can't trust other dogs and other people with their dogs to go off leash. I'm not there yet, nor do I ever think I will be there, so to speak. For the safety, I want ironclad recall. but I don't think I can really go off leash 100% where I live. It's just not safe. And so yeah, no, I wish my dog had those opportunities to like run freely, but the dog parks are a nightmare because people are not respectful in them usually, and a lot of untrained dogs in those dog parks causing fights and things like that. So unfortunately, the hyperarousal state, yeah, does get in the way of training these kind of things. Even though when it happens, I don't usually panic unless he was off leash like he was, and then I have to like figure out how to stop it because he may run out somewhere I do not want him running out to, and you know the deal. So with any in any event, somebody said, well, walking in the park, do you give him treats? So I treat him when I'm training him. So if I am doing the recall training, or if I am doing training around, I don't do it for all kinds of training. So for example, with my heel training, which is like getting him to walk loosely by my side, I don't generally treat that, because what I do instead is direction changes. So for anyone struggling with this with your dog, if your dog is like running out ahead, pulling, one of the best things you could do is get a slip lead and wrap it around right below their head, right at that like neck headline, and begin direction changes. So just change directions, and then usually I don't mark with a treat. I just mark with a word when they give into the leash pressure. And over time, you'll notice your dog is more attentive and walking in heel. And for me, but I treat for things that are really special, like recall really needs to be ironclad. Attention on me, I also focus on like what, like look, like the command look. So they look at me when I want them to look at me, and I'll treat that. So yeah, I do use treats, but one thing about my dog is that treats also stimulate him and can overstimulate him. So I try to balance it out a bit. And plus, treats can cause, if you do too many, you have to get the right kind. If you do too many, it can cause problems with diet and all kinds of other things. So anyway, so yeah, no, Soccer Papa said, yes, this is true. Sacred Papa said, remember, loose lead is completely controlled, tight lead, yes. And that's why I try to practice loose lead at all times. But anyway, that is the Dog Chronicles. I am well overdue to leave here tonight, so I gotta go. But thank you so much, everyone. Of course, let me see. I don't think I had any new Patreon subscribers tonight. No, I have a lot of new Substack free subscribers. Actually, I have Dean Connors, who raised their pledge by $8. Thank you so much, Dean, if you are in the audience. And so it's very generous. David Ravitcher sent me $10 for the show. So thank you, David. These are all coming into my email, so I just wanted to make sure I shout those out before I leave. Like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell before you leave. Of course, support the tech drive, support this channel's increasing costs, help this channel become more sustainable as it grows through Patreon, patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong, through Substack, through the one-time options, through super thanks, however you can do it, however you want to do it. It's great. It's well appreciated. Thank you so much. And until next time, see you on Tuesday for the special event. And I'll be sure to, I will be sure to promote it very diligently as it comes closer. Bye-bye.